The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
It's coming.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers.
My name is James Hershey. Right back.
All these shadows in my mind. My reflection I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a
That ought
ghost
to do
of
it.
you and me. Of you and me. Don't let 'em take you away. Don't let 'em bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let 'em bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I'm your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, Old Boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good. How's everybody doing tonight?
Tonight's show is going to be an interesting one. On tonight's show, we're going to talk about a creature that pretty much everybody in the world has heard of. Whether you are a 4 or 5-year-old child, or you are a 98-year-old man or woman, you've heard of this. Even though everybody's heard of this thing, I don't think a lot of people really know that much about it. Tonight's show is going to be on mermaids. Everybody knows mermaids from the Disney movie, A Little Mermaid, from the movie Splash, with Smoking Hot Daryl Hannah, stuff like that. They know that version of the mermaid. But the actual legends of the mermaids are kind of quite a bit different. And there's a whole bunch of different ones. So that's what makes this such an interesting subject to me, because you can look at all the different cultures around the world and see what their legends are and how it compares to other cultures, and try to figure out, first of all, if this thing actually exists. If it does exist, what exactly is it? Or are there multiple kinds? There's a lot of cool questions to try to answer here. Now, I don't know if we're going to be able to definitively answer any of those questions, but we're going to give it a shot. We're at least going to try to get a little closer to the answers. So first of all, what is a mermaid? That should seem rather self-explanatory to pretty much anybody who's ever watched anything on TV or read a book. But for the sake of argument, we're going to go over it again. A mermaid basically is a legendary creature that is aquatic. It has the upper body of a person, usually a female, but there are mermen as well, but they're just not as prevalent as the mermaids. But it has the upper body of a female or a man, it's a human, and the lower body of like a fish. Now, mermaids appear in the legends and the mythologies and the folklore pretty much all over the world, pretty much everywhere, all the way from here in America to Asia to Europe to Africa. Pretty much everywhere has some sort of mythologies or legends dealing with either mermaids or mermaid-like creatures. So this is something, when I said earlier that pretty much everybody knows what a mermaid is, it's not only from the Disney movie and from Hollywood movies, it's also because every culture pretty much on Earth has some sort of mermaid mythology and legend to it, which is interesting to me because I've said on other shows, when dealing with a legendary or cryptozoological creature, if every culture on Earth has some sort of legend about this creature, then there's a really good chance that either it exists or that something exists that that legend or folklore would be based on. So what I mean by that is, let's say we're talking mermaids here. So either actual mermaids exist, or you have some sort of aquatic creature that the mermaid legends would be based on. So some actual flesh and blood animal exists in the oceans that sailors would see and think was a mermaid. One of those two things is most likely true. The chances of there being a legendary creature that is shared worldwide in the different mythologies and folklores of the entire world, back in a time when some of these countries didn't even know the other countries existed, but yet they have the same mythologies and the same folklore, the chances of that happening and it being a completely made-up story are very, very slim. It has to be based on something. So mermaids were known pretty much everywhere. In all the movies and the pop culture, the understanding that we have of mermaids now. Mermaids are seen as protectors of the sea. They're seen as happy, lovable, wonderful creatures, basically. Rather benevolent. They're not seen as very dangerous. But that's not the way the mermaid legends originally were. Mermaids used to be associated with really bad things, like really severe storms, bad floods, shipwrecks, drowning, getting lost at sea. Those kind of things were believed to be caused by mermaids. Basically, if you saw a mermaid, like if you saw one nowadays, it would be like, oh wow, look, a mermaid, that's so cool, right? You would be so excited. But back in those days when these legends were believed by the majority of people, if you saw a mermaid, it was not a reason for celebration. Instead, it was a very bad omen. You know, if you saw a mermaid on your trip, then the first thing you would think is, oh man, this is not going to be good. This trip is going to go very badly. That's basically what the legends used to be and now what they are now, which is kind of cool. Now, in the beginning, there was also some mermaids that were benevolent towards humans, and sometimes even helpful towards humans. Most of those old tales involved men falling in love with mermaids. So it wasn't all bad, but it was mostly bad back in the beginning. Now, there's also mermen, like I said, but the majority of the lore has to do with mermaids. Now, the first known mermaid stories come from Assyria in about 1000 BC. Now, this has to do with the goddess Artemis, and supposedly, according to legend, Artemis loved a mortal person who was a shepherd, a mortal man, and accidentally killed him. And she felt horrible about accidentally killing the person that she loved. So she jumped into a lake and transformed herself into a fish. You would think the story might stop there. You know, the goddess fell in love with a human, accidentally killed the dude, felt horrible about it, jumped into the water, turned into a fish, credits roll, everybody goes home. But the problem was she was a goddess. So, according to the legend, the waters that she jumped into could not completely conceal her divine beauty. So, only half of her body turned into a fish. The upper half of her body remained human and was extremely beautiful still. So that supposedly is where mermaids came from, is from that origin story. It's kind of interesting to me because if you actually research Artemis, the goddess, separate from this mythology of mermaids, if you just research her, the earliest representations of the goddess Artemis actually showed her as a fish with a human head and human arm. If you look at the early representations of that goddess, it's not half and half. It's mostly fish, a little bit human. So I don't know exactly which came first, whether the representations of her came before the legend or the legend came before the representations of her that I've seen, but that was just a very interesting part of this for me, and I can't quite reconcile those two yet. The Greeks had a different view of mermaids than the Assyrians did. The Greek philosophers believed that mankind had come from the sea, that it used to be a aquatic animal and it evolved out of the sea into a human from the sea, basically. Like science has a theory of evolution, which states that mankind evolved from primates. Over millions of years became what we are now. That's the theory of evolution. The Greeks believed that the same basic principle took place, but instead of being an ape, it was something in the sea. And that's where the legend of mermaids come in with the Greeks, is that they believe that it's some sort of halfway point between the two, basically. But it's strange because those philosophers at that time, they also believed that the mermaids are babies for a long, long, long time. They have a much slower lifespan than us. So basically their lifespan would span over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years instead of our normal human lifespan. And as we evolved and became humans, our lifespan shortened. The reason I bring that up is because science also has a theory that has to do with the ocean. It's called the aquatic ape theory. And basically, the aquatic ape theory really doesn't have anything to do with apes. It's the idea that mankind originated in the ocean, that we used to be ocean creatures, and that we have evolved into what we are now. That at some point, a sea creature began to be able to breathe air and water, basically become like an amphibian, and came out of the ocean and began breathing air full time. And as time went on, our fins turned more into arms so we could crawl better, and basically we just evolved from there. That's the basics of the aquatic ape theory. There's a lot more to it, but that's a basic overview of it. If you want to know more, Google it. I'm sure you can find tons of info online about it. It's a really interesting theory. And some of the things they say in the aquatic ape theory kind of make a little bit of sense. I'm not saying it's true, but they talk about how we store blubber and how that's a common thing in creatures that live in really cold climates or creatures that live in the water, such as walruses and seals and stuff like that. They store a lot of blubber to insulate the body and to keep warm. There's also things about how our hair grows on our body and flows in all a certain way. It's really interesting. If you want to check it out, I'm sure, like I said, you can find tons of info on it. Now, there's a lot of actual, I guess I'm going to call them sightings of mermaids throughout history. Pliny the Elder, in something he wrote called Natural History, he describes numerous sightings of mermaids off the coast of Gaul. And he said that their bodies were covered completely in scales, and for whatever reason, it was rather common for their dead bodies to wash up on the shore. And he said in the Natural History that the governor of Gaul wrote a letter to Emperor Augustus to inform him of a large number of mermaid corpses washing up on the coastline, on the shore, and to let him know that was happening and wait for him to tell him what to do about it, basically. That's one example of a governor writing to an emperor about mermaid bodies washing up that's in the history. That's kind of interesting. Because if you have something that is completely made up, why would there be a letter from a governor to an emperor about mermaid bodies washing up, and what do I do about this, basically? Now, in the Ballad of Sir Patrick, there's a story of a mermaid that would speak to different ships before they would either go missing or sink. In some of those versions, she will tell the sailors on the ship that they're doomed and they will never see land again. In other versions, she says that they are near the shore, and they take it to mean basically the same thing. Now, what's interesting about this is in the Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, they have a little bit of a different description of mermaids there than I've seen anywhere else. They actually describe mermaids as being sometimes up to 2,000 feet long. I mean, that is a gigantic mermaid. I mean, you think a big guy now, an NBA player is 7 foot, maybe a little bit over, and think 2,000 foot tall, basically. That is humongous. It's the only place I've ever seen it. In all the other mythologies and folklore of mermaids, I've never seen them that large. So I really don't put a whole lot of stock in that as far as it being canon for mermaids, but I found it very interesting. I thought I'd bring it up in the show. Now, another neat thing about it is that mermaids are also described as being able to not only get you at sea, but to actually be able to enter rivers and freshwater lakes as well and swim up them. Kind of like the bull shark does. A bull shark can live in the ocean and it can also live in fresh water. So there's been points in history where bull sharks have actually swam into the river systems and attacked people hundreds of miles away from the ocean in the rivers or a lake, which if you think about it is absolutely terrifying. Because I live in the South, and down here we quite often go to the river to fish, to swim, to do all kinds of things. I mean, we have public pools here just like everywhere else, but a lot of the people here would rather go take a dip in the river than they would go to the pool and swim around in chemicals. So think about that. If you're going down to the river and you get in to swim and you get attacked by a shark, I mean, that's something you would never expect to find in a river, but it's happened. And they describe here that mermaids have that same ability to swim into the rivers and the lakes. And in one of the stories, the Laird of Lorntai went to aid a woman that he thought was drowning in a lake that was by his house. And right when he went to get in the water, one of his servants grabbed him and pulled him back. And he warned him that it was not a lady that was drowning that he was trying to save. It was actually a mermaid, and he was being fooled. And the mermaid didn't appreciate the servant doing that, and she got pissed off and screamed at him and said, you know, I would have killed you if your servant didn't save you, basically. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what she said. So that was kind of interesting, and it illustrates that point that mermaids, according to some of the legends, don't just live in the sea. They can basically exist in any body of water. Now, I would assume that just because they could possibly be in a river or a lake, I would assume that that river or lake would have to be connected in some way to the ocean for them to be able to get there. Because they're not just going to appear in a lake. If it's not connected to the ocean, there'd be no way for them to travel from the ocean to the lake. So logic would suggest that if mermaids are real and they did appear in one of those places, they would have to be connected in some way. There's also other historical accounts of mermaids appearing by people that are pretty well known. One of them is Christopher Columbus. He put in his ship's logs several times that he had spotted mermaids as he was making his journey. Now, I talked about earlier that it had to be one of two things. Either mermaids existed or that there's some animal out there that people are mistaking for mermaids. Along his path that he was traveling, there are manatees. And that's what a lot of people think that he saw and mistake for mermaids was the manatee. The manatee looks kind of human-like shape-wise. Not exactly, but maybe from a distance, and if you see it quickly, it's possible. But manatees are not beautiful by any means. They are fat and they are ugly. So the idea of this gorgeous, beautiful mermaid, there's no way that Columbus or anybody else could mistake a mermaid for that. But the interesting thing here is that in the early mythologies, mermaids were not always beautiful. Yes, you had some mythologies and folklore where they were beautiful women, but a lot of those come from later on. A lot of the earliest mythologies and folklore of mermaids, they are not beautiful creatures at all, but they are very almost evil creatures. And they're definitely something to be feared, not something that a man would fall in love with. Now, there are different creatures that are associated with the legend of mermaids that do fall into that category of being beautiful. One of these creatures that in some cultures is different than a mermaid, but similar, if that makes any sense. That sounds kind of confusing. It's not considered a mermaid, but it is very close to a mermaid. I'll say it that way. Is the siren. Now, everybody knows the siren from different Celtic tales and from Greek mythology. The siren basically is a beautiful woman that will sing to you and you fall in under her spell. And in different versions, either she causes your ship to crash and you die, or in some versions, some of the more gruesome versions of the mythologies, they will actually eat you. So they cause you to fall in love with them, they lure you in, and then they feast on you. Now, in some of the mythologies and the folklores, the siren is the same thing as a mermaid. It's considered a mermaid. In others, it's considered almost a close cousin to the mermaid, but not exactly a mermaid. In some of the mythologies, the sirens look like a mermaid, where they have fish tails and upper body is a woman. In some of them, they look exactly like a very, very sexy, hot woman, just with the ability to breathe underwater and a beautiful hypnotic voice that when they sing to you makes you be under their spell. Now remember, I said in the beginning, there's a whole bunch of different legends here and a whole bunch of different versions of this. So you're going to have people that are going to say, that's not what a siren is at all, or that's not what a mermaid is at all. In some of the mythologies and some of the histories and some of the folklore, you are absolutely right. And in some of them, you're absolutely wrong. It all depends on what area you're talking about and what creature you're talking about, basically. Because like I said, there's a whole lot of different ones. In the Slavic culture, mermaids are called the Rusalkas. And they are basically what I was just describing, which is a siren. And basically there's a bunch of different versions of this in the Slavic traditions, but they all basically share one common element. And this is an element that is completely different than any of the other mythology or folklore of mermaids. And that is that every single version of the Slavic mermaid is actually the restless spirit of the unclean dead. So basically it's somebody that was human that died, who was considered unclean because of sin or because they were not given the proper burial rites or by something they did in their life that caused them to be unclean. And a lot of times it's the ghost of young women that died either before their time, so they did not get a chance to actually live their life, or no matter when they died in their life, they died in a horribly violent way. It could be murder, or it could even be suicide. It could be that they had a very terrible suicide, and that's why they became the mermaid. A lot of times in the stories, it's either before a wedding, so it's like their wedding day or the day before their wedding, and they take their own life or they're murdered, and that causes them to be restless. Or a lot of times in the stories, they die by drowning, and that causes them to become a mermaid. Now, these are seen more often in lakes and rivers than they are in the ocean, which is also very interesting. And they usually appear as beautiful young women that have long, pale green hair and pale skin. Now, that is important and interesting because this is where you begin to see how all of these different traditions and folklore kind of start to interweave with each other. Because if you think back through popular culture, there's been mermaids that appear with the green fishtail, right? Whereas in actual nature, most fish are not green at all. They're gray or silver. But the mermaid tail is usually seen as green. And in some of those movies or TV shows, they show the hair of the mermaid as green as well. Not in all, but in some. So that comes from the Rusalkas, which is the Slavic mermaids. That's where that comes from. So it's kind of interesting how they take bits and pieces of all the different folklore and they weave it all together for the overall image of the mermaid and the mythology of the mermaid that everybody agrees on today. Now, there's also different places that have mermaids. I mean, in Africa, the mermaids are called the Mami Water, which translated, I think, is like mother of the water or something along those lines. And these are considered water spirits, and they're actually worshipped in a way. Now, these are also usually female. There are cases of them being male, but most times they're female. And they are considered to be not necessarily purely evil, but more diabolical. And most times in the legends and the stories, the thing that they're doing that's so diabolical and terrible is they are tricking men and most times luring them to their death. So they do something to make the man come to them, and it ends up killing him. There's also mermaids in the Caribbean, which should be fairly obvious, pretty much all over the place. Now, I spoke earlier about Christopher Columbus and the manatee, and that's what the majority of people claim that the early sightings of mermaids were manatees. Most experts and historians, when they look back on this time period, they look back on these legends, they say, okay, this was just a case of misidentification. This was a case of them seeing a creature that they had never seen before. Because remember, Christopher Columbus, he was entering territory that he had never been in before. So it stands to reason that he's going to see creatures that he has never seen before. So that's the argument that you'll be given by people that don't believe mermaids exist, that think that this is a simple case of misidentification, is that it was a manatee. But Christopher Columbus was not the only well-known person in history to see mermaids and to make records of seeing mermaids. Another one was a pirate, and it's a very well-known pirate. It's Blackbeard the pirate. Actually had a lot of different mermaid sightings, and if you look back through his logbooks, it says in his logbooks that he ordered his crew multiple times on multiple different voyages to steer away from different areas. And in his logbooks, he says the reason he ordered his crew to steer away from those areas was because they were enchanted, and they were inhabited by either mermaids or mermen. So in his logbooks, you have written record of mermaids inhabiting certain areas and them avoiding those areas. Now you might think, okay, that's kind of just superstitious. And you may very well be correct. But what always makes me wonder about this particular event is you have Blackbeard the pirate. Now, in nobody's mind is Blackbeard the pirate a coward. I mean, he's a pirate. He kills people for a living and robs them, basically. But here you have him avoiding a whole area of the ocean because he believes that mermaids are there and that they will destroy his ship and destroy his crew. Now, if he did not honestly believe that to be the truth, if it was only superstition, and he didn't believe that that was actually true, why would a man such as Blackbeard, who would not be afraid of most things, obviously be afraid of this? That I don't know. But it's an interesting question. Because in his mind, he believed that these things are real. You can tell that because he wouldn't have avoided that area if he didn't. Because I'm sure there were ships that went through that area. And I'm sure that some of the ships that went through that area were merchant ships that had a lot of money and goods on them that he could have stole. And they probably used that area because they knew he wouldn't go into it because he was afraid of mermaids. So he was missing out on some cash by not going in there. But he wouldn't go in there because he believed that mermaids were there. And he didn't want to risk it. So that lets you know that he really did believe that. The question of, are mermaids real? Do I believe mermaids are actually real? Or do I think that mermaids are a thing of legend and folklore? I think that the mermaid that we think of today, such as Ariel, or any of those other mermaids from 1,000 different movies, I don't believe they exist. I think that is a fantasy. Is there some sort of creature that could be mistaken for a mermaid? I don't mean a normal animal that everybody knows about that is a misidentification. Although I'm sure that does happen some. But what I mean is there's some sort of unknown creature that people are seeing and thinking is a mermaid. To that, I say possible. Maybe not probable, but possible. Because we don't know a whole lot about the ocean as far as what's actually in it. I mean, just recently we actually discovered that the giant squid was real. We thought that was a legend forever. And we just got it on film not too long ago, and one washed up not too long ago as well. So that is a fairly recent discovery that we made, that thing actually does exist. For all of recorded history, that was a sea monster. It was a legend. A lot of people will recognize the name the Kraken. That's what the Kraken was a giant squid. Now, granted, the Kraken was an exaggerated version of the giant squid, much larger than the actual giant squid. But that's essentially what it was. So that was completely legendary for a long, long time, and now we know it to be real. So could there be creatures that resemble a mermaid close enough to be considered a mermaid? To that I say it could entirely be possible. Now there are some bits of footage that I have seen from some of the deep water oil drills and stuff like that, oil wells, that have some things on it that look kind of like a mermaid. Now they don't look like the beautiful mermaid that you're used to seeing. They're hideous. These things look like monsters. They don't look beautiful at all. Definitely no risk of falling in love with one if you see it. But I don't know what it is. It could very well just be a normal animal that has that kind of shape, because you don't see it for long in the footage. And it's not a very good picture either when you're watching a video, because it's shot underwater. It's only has like lights. It's not real well lit because it's down a little bit. So all you see is in the span of that light. So what you're seeing is murky and blurry and only for a second. So I don't know. I don't know if there's something out there that exists that looks enough like a mermaid to be called a mermaid or not. But I think it might be possible. So I'm going to throw over to Old Boy and get his opinion.
Well, thank you, buddy. This is one that's always kind of interested me, the mermaid thing. I was kind of leery about doing this one because I kind of have my opinions on it. I think it was more of a sailor's tale, but it's got some kind of probably basis truth of like everything has some kind of truth to it. I mean, the thing's been around for thousands of years, even millions of years. People said the stories go from Greek time, from 1000 BC, even before that, 500 BC. There was a coin that had one of the gods on it, and the other side it has a fish's body with a human's head. So, I mean, they believed it. Plato believed that these things existed, and so did a lot of Greeks. But the Greeks believed a lot of things. They believed in gods and one-eyed monsters and hydras and whatever, the Kraken, all kinds of crazy things. The Kraken might have been real anyway. It was like James said, they found out they had the giant octopus exist. They have videos, and the Megalodon, they found out that they have videos of that. But the only thing about mermaids, and I'm going to say, is some of the stuff like Animal Planet, they said it was fake documentaries. They're not really real, and I've seen some of this. So some of the stuff that they've made about mermaids was not true, especially Animal Planet, I guess. They're saying that none of this stuff was real. I'm getting into the Hollywood side of it. But it's very popular. Everybody loves these creatures. I mean, they've been around for thousands of years. So I guess there's got to be some kind of truth. I know they made a fairy tale about it in the 1800s. John Christian Andersen, about a love story with a mermaid. And then I think they kind of got that from Disney. He made the Little Mermaid movie. The movie Splash with Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks. Mermaids have always been popular. Neptune, the god, they said he had a body of was a man, but a fish's body. Titan, one of the gods in Greek mythology. So, I mean, this has always been a very popular subject. The sirens, that's how you say them. But they say they're a different creature, that it kind of got mixed together with the mermaids. And they're, like James was saying, was a spirit that casted people to their death, like shipwrecks, or they drowned, or got attacked, and they were just like a bad omen, like a vengeful spirit or a lost spirit. And I think mermaids, people exaggerated and make them look like they were human, but they were like more, if they are real, they're more fish-like. They're more ugly-looking creatures. You're not going to want to fall in love with them like Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks, and you're going to, go out and go catch one and fall in love with them. That's ridiculous. If these things do exist, there was talk about how we came from the sea, and we split off, and they learned how to live and split to half man, half human, and then we evolved to come out of the sea and become human. I've heard that story before. I've seen. I don't believe it, but it may be true. You never know. Like I said, I don't put down anybody's belief or or opinions. I'm just saying I don't personally believe it. But these creatures weren't something you wanted to love. They were ugly looking, and like James says, there's stories of, these stories will go to Asia, to Europe, Greece, all over the place, Asia. And what they would do is get sailors to fall in love with them, and they were beautiful because they had nice. Sorry guys, but nice body, nice rack, but they had a body of a fish. And what they would do is sing songs and lure these sailors to their death, or drown them, or they would feast on them. To what I read, and I heard there is merman too. They're half man, half fish, and they would lure women in and do the same thing, or supposedly they would kidnap them and mate with them and have more and have half breeds. So that became another story that's, just like the Little Mermaid story, but it was the other way around. They would take and, do things with women and make their own kind of creature or something. I don't know. But I've always never really been into the mermaid thing. I think it's a cool love story. I think it's cool for kids because it's very popular with little kids and a lot of people, a lot of movies. Like I said, it's very popular. These things been around forever. I don't personally never cared. I think they're cool. It's a cool thing to talk about. It's something different, but I never been interested in it. But I don't think that I know 100% that they're real. I think, like James says, I kind of got to agree with him. I think they're exaggerated stories. And if they're real, they're not what you guys think. They're not beautiful women with a big rack or beautiful stocky men with a nice body with a fish's tail, and they come up and love you and sing songs about love, and then they do crazy things and take you to the bottom of the ocean and eat you and barbecue you up on a grill out there, or whatever they do. They might gut us like we gut fish to get revenge. But I highly doubt they exist. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think it's more of a fairy tale, not fantasy. A fairy tale, more of a fantasy thing. I think there's probably some truth to it, but I think it's been very much exaggerated. And all I could say is, the movies are cool, like The Little Mermaid, that was a cool cartoon, or whatever. There's 2 or 3 of them now. Splash has always been a great movie because I like Tom Hanks, and Daryl Hannah was smoking hot. I don't like skinny women, but she was a very beautiful woman. Not saying I hate skinny women. I've never been real attracted to them. I have different taste of women, but she's a very beautiful woman, and I thought she played a perfect part in that movie. There's also a movie. It's the American Guinea Pig series. I'm not Dominican, the Japanese guinea pig. The reason I'm bringing this up, we're friends with the people who make the American guinea pig. But there's one about a mermaid that people catch, and they do all kinds of crazy things. It's a disturbing movie, but it's kind of out there, and they do crazy things to her, and they cut her up. It's really crazy. But there's that movie. They also made horror movies about them, and what was that movie? Somebody in the lightning bolt, Perry something. In the lightning bolt, it had mermaids in it, and they were ugly-looking creatures. And there was a guy who made a body to try to make it look like mermaids existed. He took a fish body and tried to make it look like a human's body. It was fake. They found out it was fake, but it's pretty funny how they did it. It was Barnum and Bailey back then. They supposedly had a dead body of a mermaid, and they put it on. Back then they would take freak shows, and that was one of their sideshows. It was a body of a mermaid, and it was like an ugly looking 3 foot. Like, people don't realize they say mermaids really are only like 3 or 4 feet long. And this one was like 2 or 3 feet. It was ugly looking, had an ugly looking face. It had like a fish face, like it was like from a monster movie. It was real stupid looking, but I seen that, and like I said, it's a cool story, but I probably don't believe it, and sorry, somebody probably going to get mad, but I really think this is another fantasy story. I don't agree with it even exists. I think maybe something close to it, but I think it could be explained. I think it was a story for fishermen. It went through the time and there's probably some truth to it, but it's been exaggerated to scare people, and comes to a folklore. People make things bigger than they were, and I think that's all that happened. It got exaggerated over years. So that's all I got to say, James, about that.
Yeah, I think most likely if there is something out there that resembles the mermaid, that that you could say, okay, this is a mermaid, I think most likely it's going to look way more like the creature from the Black Lagoon than it will look like Daryl Hannah. You know, I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. Is it's going to be ugly as hell, and it's most likely going to be very fat as well. The reason I say that is because in order for a creature to regulate its temperature, it either needs a lot of fur on land or it needs blubber to insulate it. In the water, fur is not going to do you a lot of good because fur will get wet and it will actually make you colder. So in the water, the preferred method of insulating and heating the body is blubber. That's why you see a lot of these larger sea creatures, such as the walruses, the larger manatees, whales, all these kind of creatures, they have an excess of blubber in order to keep the body warm. So, most likely the mermaid would also have a very thick layer of blubber to insulate the body and keep it warm. So, if you actually saw a real life mermaid, most likely it's going to be very large, fat thing, and it's probably going to be very ugly looking. It's going to be scaly. It's literally going to look like the creature from the Black Lagoon or like a reptilian looking creature. Part fish, part scaly reptile looking thing, basically. I think that's more what the reality of the situation would be than the beautiful woman. I mean, there's no reason for it to be a beautiful woman. That doesn't make any sense scientifically. Why would a sea creature that lives in the ocean all the time, why would they even have breasts? It doesn't make any sense. The whole purpose of breast is to breastfeed, but how many fish or aquatic animals do you know that breastfeed? I don't know of any off the top of my head, and I doubt I could find any if I researched it. Now, I might be wrong. There might be some zoologists out there who will say in the comments, "Oh, you forgot about the rainbow-tailed lily pad liquor or something." I don't know, but there might be something out there that does actually breastfeed in the ocean, but I've never heard of it in my life. So I don't understand why mermaids would need breast anyway. So that part of the legend right there tells me that something's wrong here. So most likely, if they do exist, it'll be some kind of very hideous, very unappealing looking creature that most likely we wouldn't even really recognize as any sort of a humanoid form anyway, other than the fact that maybe it has hands and a head and a mouth and eyes. You know, that would be the only thing that would resemble a humanoid form at all, really. Because if it has the lower half of a fish or a serpentine-like lower half, because in some of the folklore, the mermaids didn't have fish tails, they had like a long serpent's tail. So that's also in the mythology and the folklore. But it's going to be one of those two. And it's not really going to look a whole lot like a human being. So, like I said earlier, it's possible that there might be some sort of animal out there that looks a little bit like a humanoid form in some way, and that might be considered a mermaid. I think the most likely scenario here is that it was either a manatee or it was a creature, like I was just saying, that is in some way a humanoid kind of form, but is still very much a sea creature. It's not a intelligent creature that communicates with you. I don't believe for a second that there is some creature that is going to pop up out of the water in the middle of the ocean and sing beautiful songs to you to lure you over to it. That makes no sense. Because first of all, if it's in the ocean, how would it even know what music is to sing you a song? The only time you hear that in nature is mostly with birds and stuff like that, is they will have a whistling kind of songy kind of call. It's usually a mating call. Some other species of animals have something similar where they do musical kind of mating calls, but I don't really know of any aquatic animals that do that. Now, some aquatic animals will use sonar to navigate, and I guess an argument could be made that that is in some way a music. But as far as being an auditory music that you could hear and appreciate as music, and definitely that would be appealing to a human being and cause us to enjoy it, I just don't see that happening. I don't see how they would have any way to know what that even sounds like, because there's nothing around them in their natural environment that would make that kind of noise to where they would be able to copy it. So I'm going to say, like I said, it's possible, but not probable at all. I think most likely mermaids do not exist. And I would say definitely they do not exist in the form that we think that of a mermaid being. I don't believe that for a second. I think that there is a slim chance that there might be some sort of creature out there in the oceans that we have not yet discovered that in some superficial way resembles a human enough to be called a mermaid. But I think as far as the legends and the folklore, I think the majority of that is not true. You know, I don't believe for a second that the mermaid exists in a form that we would recognize it right away as a mermaid. So that's basically my ruling on it. I'm going to throw over to Old Boy again and let him do his shout outs, and then we're going to wrap up because we're just about out of time.
Thank you, brother. And it was a very enjoyable show, even though I don't believe it, and it's very improbable. I believe there's always a chance for everything. I just don't believe it. But yeah, thank you, brother. I want to give a shout out to everybody on ParaX, on all our listeners, all our fans. I love you guys. Thank you again for listening to us. Remember, always check out our old shows on James Hershey's YouTube page. Just subscribe. Also, check out our Patreon page. You guys can either sponsor once in a while, or you could sponsor us all the time. You can do advertising, and there's little perks for that too. You could check that out, guys. And James will explain it more after this because I'm not good at that thing, on that kind of stuff. But I want to thank you guys. I love you. I want to give a shout out to my daughter. I love you so much, more than anything in this world. I love my fans. And thank you for letting us do this show. We love doing this show for you guys, like I said, every week. And we love the feedback we're getting. 99% of it's always good. There's always going to be here and there, but that's life. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't believe anything. But that you can't change that. But I don't care. We don't care what they think. That's always life. There's always going to be a hater somewhere. But thank you guys. I love you guys. And have a good night. Sugar ladies, misfits, and demon hunters. I love you guys. Good night.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. And thank you for all the support for the show. And on a personal note, thank you guys to all my readers, all the people that enjoy my novels. Thank you so much for buying the books. Thank you for coming out to the book signings and showing up to get your picture taken with me and to get my autograph on the books and stuff like that. I've got 4 novels out. I've had a decent amount of success, but it still blows my mind sometimes when you guys drive, and some people that I've talked to at these signings have driven for 100 miles or more to get there, to see me, and to get me to sign their book and to take a picture with me. And that still to this day kind of blows my mind. And believe me, I greatly appreciate you guys. And I love you so much. And I hope that you guys really understand that. Because without you, I couldn't do what I love for a living. I couldn't be a storyteller. I couldn't write novels and make a living doing that if it wasn't for you. You know, I couldn't do this show and talk about the things that we talk about without your love and your support. So it really does mean the world to me, and I really appreciate every one of you. I hope you know that. To all the people that message me and tell me that they enjoy the show and all that stuff, I really appreciate that. Thank you guys. We really enjoy getting messages from you. We always try to answer we always try to message you back and comment back to you and stuff like that, or at least, like your comment or something to show that, yeah, we saw it and we appreciate it. Sometimes it's not possible because sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, and I'm sure you understand. But just thank you guys, man. The YouTube page is youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. It has all the old Staring into the Abyss shows. It also has side videos that we've done about the different subjects. It's 100% free, and if I have anything to say about it, it's always going to be 100% free. I'm never going to charge you for it. I put it there for the people that miss a show, that want to go and catch the show, and basically for you guys just to enjoy. Because what we try to do on this show, at least me, I try to impart as much wisdom and as much knowledge as I possibly can. Because I'm a guy that really loves to do the research. I get interested in something and I have to know everything I can know about it. And as a result of that, I have built up a great amount of knowledge over the years about a bunch of different subjects. And there's a bunch of different things that I'm really passionate about that I really enjoy. So I try to share that, through the shows and through the videos. And so that's why it's always going to be 100% free, because I hope you guys get the same enjoyment and the love out of our shows and out of our videos as we feel when we do them. Because this is really a labor of love for us. We do this show because we love it. And that's why we talk about so many different things, is because a lot of these things are things that we're interested in, or sometimes at least one of us is interested in, and we want to talk about it. We want to share the knowledge that we have with you guys. So thank you so much for the support. Thank you for everything. The Patreon page is patreon.com/James Hershey Jr. There's a bunch of different reward tiers there. If you guys want to support the show, then please, by all means, go to the Patreon page and pledge. You can pledge anywhere from $1 all the way up to, I think there's a $50 tier is the highest. It might be a $100 tier is the highest, but even $1 is awesome.
Actually, there's about a $200 tier.
Is there?
Yeah, like 150 or 200.
Wow.
Even actually, there's a 250.
Wow.
So yeah, just sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to let you know that.
we're kind of new at the Patreon thing. We just set it up not too long ago, and we don't know a whole lot about it yet. But that's a way you guys can go and you can support the show and enable us to continue doing this long term. We hope that we can, but we really enjoy it, and as long as we can, we're going to keep doing this show for you. So with that being said, guys, we are pretty much out of time. So until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. We love you. Bye-bye.